Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Chapter 4 lecture on health and wellness. So this is a very important topic for us to be talking about right now. We're going to be talking about things like stress, different coping mechanisms, self-care, and we're going to talk about some health issues as well. So we're going to start off talking about stress. So I know that everybody has experienced stress. We all know how stressful life can be, especially you guys as college students. I'm sure you have jobs that you're juggling. You may have kids, other responsibilities on top of your classes is a lot. So college students definitely know how stressful life can be. So one of the first things I want to talk about with stress, your textbook talks about how we appraise situations, which can determine if we experience stress or not. So in your textbook, there are two terms, primary appraisal and secondary appraisal. So I'm going to go over those really quickly. Primary appraisal is our assessment of an event to determine whether its implications are positive, negative, or neutral. So, for example, if in the past you had failed a math test and you have an upcoming math test, your primary appraisal would probably be negative because your assessment of the event is that I failed before, so I'm probably going to fail this test as well. So that's a negative. You're thinking there's going to be negative consequences. If you had passed the test before, you might appraise that situation of the upcoming test as positive because you're confident in your ability to pass the test. Okay, so that's primary appraisal. So what's happening in primary appraisal is that we are assessing a situation and deciding if the implications of that situation are positive, negative, or neutral. So then there's also secondary appraisal, which is essentially where you're asking the question, can I handle this situation? So you've decided if the situation is positive, negative, or neutral, and then you also have to ask yourself if you can handle it. So some things you might consider are your coping abilities and resources adequate to handle the situation? So sticking with our math test example, if you have the ability to go to a tutoring center, then that might, even though you originally appraise a situation as negative, having the ability to go to a tutoring center might let you answer the question, can I handle it in a positive way? Another example is if you get a speeding ticket, that might be way less stressful if you have plenty of money to pay for the ticket. But if you don't have the money to pay for the ticket, that's going to make that situation a lot more stressful. So that again is primary and secondary appraisal. So this is just how we look at different situations to determine, is this event going to have positive, negative, or neutral implications for me? And also, no matter what the answer to the first question is, can I handle it? So your answers to those questions are going to vary, and then that's going to vary on how stressed out you feel because of that situation. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the implications of stress. So stress really does have consequences on our body, both physically and mentally. So quickly, I just want to talk about where how we experience stress depending on how old you are. So different stages of the lifespan. So for children in the U.S., they experience stress with increasing academic demand. So we put a lot of pressure on kids from a really young age to perform very well academically. We start them off very young, even younger, as young as preschool age, trying to prepare them for college. Um, but research has found that for children under fifth grade, homework has no benefit to them, and it interferes with their physical and social development and leads to a lot of stress. For adolescents, they experience sleep deprivation due to their academic and social stresses, and they are at high risk for developing eating disorders. Whenever you get to adulthood, your stressors can change over the course of adulthood. So if you have children, you might be stressed about that. If you're an older adult and you're retiring, you may be stressed about that. So it just depends on your individual life and what life stage you're in at that time. If you have kids, what you're stressed about in the beginning, having an infant is going to be way different than what you're stressed about whenever they leave for college or leave your home in general. Okay, so like I said, experiencing stress long term, um, all the time can have some serious consequences. So this chart is in your textbook about the different consequences stress has on our bodies. So there are direct physiological effects. So these are things that you could easily measure, like your blood pressure might be elevated, your immune system functioning decreases, you have more hormones going on, which can lead to a lot of different issues, things like weight gain and stuff like that. And then there are the psychophysiological conditions, which we'll get to in a second. Um, Increased stress also leads to harmful behaviors, such as increase the use of nicotine and alcohol. So that's a way that people go to cope, is by consuming alcohol or smoking. Drug use is another one. You probably lose sleep, and your nutrition declines. So I'm sure you know, again, as college students, that when you get really stressed out about an exam that's coming up that you're up all night studying for, you're not sleeping and you're not eating. Um, some people, they don't eat at all, or some people go for just junk food eating. They eat too much, but either way, your nutrition is not where it should be. Indirect health-related behaviors. So they have seen some correlations here where people who are experiencing stress don't tend to follow the advice of their doctor. They don't tend to seek out medical care, and they're less likely to exercise as well. Exercise is a really great way that you can decrease stress, so try to be aware of that in your own personal lives. So psychophysiological conditions, those are going to be things like that are not necessarily a physical, they don't necessarily have a physical cause. So like if you have a stomach ulcer, or a cold sore or a headache, it's not necessarily coming from a biological cause, it's coming from experiencing stress. So that's why they call it psychophysiological. So I'm sure some of you have experience with that as well. If you get really stressed out, maybe you break out in hives, maybe you get a stomach ulcer, maybe you get a cold sore. Um, Sometimes I even get sick and start to feel kind of sick if I get too stressed out or sleep deprived. So those are all psychophysiological because there's not a biological cause. It's so like the hives example, it's not coming from an allergic reaction, it's coming from your stress level. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about coping with stress. So what are some things you can do? So there are different types of coping, which are in your textbook. I'll go over a couple of them. So the first one is problem-focused coping. So problem-focused coping. So this is where you are managing a threatening situation by directly changing it to make it less stressful. So the example your textbook gave for problem-focused coping is if you're experiencing a lot of stress at work, that you could look for a new job. So you're directly changing that situation by looking for a new job or asking to move into a different role, something like that. So compare that then to emotion-focused coping. So this is what you are consciously regulating your emotions. So same situation, you're experiencing a lot of stress at your work, but rather than trying to directly change the situation, you just say to yourself, okay, I'm just going to look on the bright side. I'm going to find all the positives and reduce your stress that way. So with problem focused, you're trying to directly change the situation somehow. With emotion focused, you're regulating your emotions. So looking on the bright side, finding the positives in the situation. Okay. The next one I want to talk about is defensive coping. So with defensive coping, this is unconscious usually, so you're not aware of it. But these are unconscious strategies to distort or deny the true nature of the situation. So you're not confronting it head on. With emotion focused and problem focused, you are confronting the situation and trying to change it somehow. With defensive coping, you're not really acknowledging the situation. So if you were diagnosed with a life-threatening disease or illness, you may trivialize that and tell yourself it's not that big of a deal, it's not that serious. So that's defensive coping. So it's like you're defending yourself against having to feel that stress. Another similar thing to that is emotional insulation, where you try to block emotions in order to avoid pain. So those two might go together, where you're distorting or denying the true nature of the situation with defensive coping, and you're also emotionally insulating, where you're blocking out any kind of emotion to avoid the pain of those emotions. You might also see people who tend to do these coping mechanisms, defensive and emotional insulation, maybe tend to turn more to drugs and alcohol to cope as well. So at the end of the lecture, we'll come back and talk about the activity you're going to do for this chapter and some other ways that you can reduce stress in a healthy way. But for now, we're going to skip to talking about some threats to wellness and health, again, across the lifespan. So we're going to start with childhood. So in childhood, accidents are going to be the main source of danger um, and the main threat to wellness and health for children. So the reason for this is that children have really high levels of physical activity, so they always want to be active, especially toddlers. Like 3 years old is when a child is the most active across the entire lifespan. They also are very curious, so they want to explore everything, they want to try everything out, they want to look at everything, touch everything, see everything. And what we learned last chapter with the prefrontal cortex not being fully developed is that they have a lack of judgment. So that means that they're not going to be able to make the best decisions and decide what to do in a safe manner. So that is why accidents are going to be the biggest threat to health and wellness for children. Another potential threat is over-medication for behavioral problems. So a lot of children now are being diagnosed with things like ADHD, and they're being prescribed medication for that. There is a debate on that, if it's being overdiagnosed or not. Some issues are that we are expecting children to behave in a way that is not how children are built to behave. So you're asking children to come to school and sit still for most of the day. They don't have enough access to physical activity. And actually, for young children, it's more exhausting for them to sit still for an hour than it would be for them to run. So that is why teachers see a lot of behavioral issues, is because children are not built to sit still and follow directions for that long period of time. So that may be have something to do with the increase in diagnosis that we see. Okay, now we're going to watch a video, which I usually like to see your discussions in class, but we'll just watch it and you can kind of think about your opinions on this. So this is not discussed in your textbook. This is the issue of free-range kids and free-range parenting. So this is essentially just making a point that probably for your parents, or if you're older yourself and you think about your childhood, you were probably raised a lot differently, or your parents were raised a lot differently than you were, or than you might raise your children. Nowadays, people don't usually let their children ride their bikes by themselves, go to the park by themselves, walk to the store, even walk home from school by themselves. And that wasn't the case in the past. Children would just leave the home and be gone all day, and would come home at night. There has been clearly a cultural shift in that, where that's not the case anymore. So that actually came out of more focus in the media on child kidnapping and those kinds of things, and it made people feel like the world isn't safe, and that they should not let their child out of their sight, essentially. So this argument with the free-range parenting is that that is actually causing more harm to children than the potential threat of them being kidnapped, letting them out of the house. So I'll let you watch watch the video and see what you think about that.
Gregory Adams is 11, his sister Aries is 8, and so some people freak out when they see this. What on earth are their parents thinking, they ask? Letting kids wander alone, crossing...
Sorry, the computer's going to try to slow the captioning down. I'll start over.
Gregory Adams is 11, his sister Aries is 8, and so some people freak out when they see this. What on earth are their parents thinking, they ask? Letting kids wander alone, crossing streets by themselves, deep in the dense and dangerous jungle we know and fear as Brooklyn.
We really wanted our kids to be independent.
Alina Adams says it's a good thing to let her children learn early to take responsibility for themselves.
The only way that you can make a person independent is if you allow them the opportunity to make their own choices and, most importantly, to make their own mistakes. Because how is anyone ever going to develop good judgment if no one has ever given them the opportunity to make a decision?
For instance,
I was playing on the scaffolding once. I did forward roll and I fell on my face, and now I know next time not to play on the scaffolding because I'll fall on my face.
You think you learn more from making mistakes than you do from getting everything right?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Alina sees herself as the antidote to the overprotective helicopter parent. She's a free-range parent.
I was a free-range parent before I knew I was a free-range parent.
Some might condemn Alina as the world's worst mom, but that would be unfair. This is the world's worst mom. Lenore Skenazy, writer, TV host, and mom of 2 boys.
World's worst, yep.
She also invented and owns the trademark for the term free-range kids, about which she's doing a radio interview at the moment.
Free-range kids is the movement I started, and you'll recognize them because they're just plain old kids raised the old-fashioned way.
This all started when Lenore let her son Izzy ride the subway all by himself.
I wasn't scared, but I was excited. Kind of like a jittery excited that I can't believe I'm finally doing this.
Okay, wait, you're thinking this isn't such a big deal. But here's what Izzy looked like when he first took that subway ride by himself. He was 9. It was all his idea. His mom just set it up. She left him at Bloomingdale's with a subway map, a fare card, and $20. He rode from Midtown Manhattan to Queens on the subway and then transferred to a bus home. And a few days later, his mom wrote a column about it.
The reaction was that I got labeled America's Worst Mom. If you Google America's Worst Mom, I'm there for 77 Google pages. I mean, I just looked it up the other day. It's like 3 million hits.
The idea of abduction is a very rare event.
So I was on all these shows instantly and being grilled, you know, why would you do this? And don't you care? And how would you have felt if you died? Like horrible questions.
You could have gotten the same experience in a safer manner.
Right,
well, let me ask you about that.
But what is the same experience is going on the subway, and that is safe. It's safe to go on the subway. It's safe to be a kid. It's actually safe to ride your bike on the streets. We're like brainwashed because of all the stories we hear that it isn't safe, but those are the exceptions. That's why they make it to the news. This is like Boyle's egg.
The emails started coming in. But the people who thought Lenore was the world's worst mom were outnumbered by those who thought she'd hit the nail on the head in a world scared witless by day-to-day living. Statistics show crime is lower now than when today's parents were kids, and cities, especially, are safer.
So I started my blog, the Free Range Kids blog, that very weekend to say my side of the story, which is that I love my children. I love safety. I love helmets, car seats, seat belts, mouth guards. Invite me to a baby shower, and the gift I inevitably bring is a fire extinguisher, right? So I'm not anti-safety. I just don't believe that our kids need a security detail when they leave the house. And that's where I realized I was slightly out of step with the rest of my country and yours.
Maybe not so out of step. Skenazy has parlayed her parenting philosophy into a reality TV show, and her idea of free-range parenting is taking root in other countries. The Land is a documentary about a playground in northern Wales that looks like this. Kids are encouraged to make their own fun in what really is a junkyard. And they do, even literally playing with fire. It's been going for about a year and no one's been hurt. But there's angst out there and it can get ugly. Devorah Mativ is 6. Her parents give her and her older brother a lot of freedom. They sometimes walk from a park that's about 1.5 kilometers away to their home in Silver Spring, Maryland. Once, A neighbor who saw them walking alone called police.
Okay, how old do they look?
Maybe 7, little boy, maybe about 7, 8, little girl, maybe about 6.
Okay, and you don't see any parents around them?
No, ma'am.
For the Maytive family, that was the start of months of trouble with the police and with Maryland's Child Protective Services,
The
CPS.
people who came the first time, they spoke very plainly. They said, what you're doing is against our policy.
CPS said that.
Yeah.
And what did you say?
Well, we looked into the law and we did not see a connection, so we said we were going to test your policy.
Or we're not, I mean, not so much tests, but we don't see a reason to change our parenting style based on some arbitrary decision from CPS.
A few months later, when police saw the kids walking home alone together again, they picked them up. But they didn't take them home. They didn't take them to the police station. They just held them.
This is in fact where the kids sat for 2.5 hours in the back of a police car.
A police car.
Right, nobody called us. Nobody walked the 2.5 blocks to tell us where the kids were.
Eventually, police took the kids to Child Protective Services, where they were held until about 10 o'clock that night. The Maytives didn't get their kids back until they signed a statement saying the children would not be left alone when off their own property. All of that has since been dropped, and the Maytives are suing CPS. Lenore Scasey's view is that if people want something to worry about, they should worry about how much more intrusive government and policing agencies are becoming in the lives of parents. Scasey says she likes to pose this question to parents. Think of something you did as a kid that you loved doing, that you don't let your own kids do, and then think about why that is. Keith Bogue, CBC News, New York. Gregory Adams is 11.
Okay, so I hope you found that video interesting. And again, I wish we were face to face so we could really discuss that and your thoughts on that. Some people in previous classes, it's a shock. It would be a radical change for a lot of people to parent that way. So I just encourage you to think about your parenting style if you have kids or how you were raised. Think about how you plan to raise your kids and really look into that because it's really interesting. And kids have to experience failure in order to learn. They have to gain independence. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to function in the real world. So that's the whole point there, is that would be a threat to wellness as overprotecting your kids, essentially. Okay, moving on to talking about adolescence. The main threat to health and wellness in adolescence is risky behaviors. So things like drug use, unprotected sex, smoking, and alcohol. So your typical things that happen in the teenage years, again, due to that prefrontal cortex not being fully developed and peer pressure during that time. For adulthood, this is when adults need to begin health screening processes to stay healthy. So like we talked about before, you start to see a decline in physical performance. You start to see signs of aging. So this is really a time where you need to be checking up on your health, going to your checkups regularly. Your textbook also talks about how in the U.S. our murder rate is higher than other developed countries, particularly for Black males. Some reasons for this might be the access to guns in our country. It might have something to do with our SES status differences here. So I encourage you to read that part of your textbook and kind of form your own opinions on that. For older adults, things like heart disease, cancer, and stroke are going to be the biggest threats to health and wellness. You also have Alzheimer's, which is progressive and produces loss of memory and confusion. A form of Alzheimer's is dementia. This is the most common form of Alzheimer's, and this causes serious memory loss and declines in mental functioning. Okay, so now let's talk about how we can promote health and wellness. So what are some things we can do to make sure that we are healthy, we're mentally well? So some suggestions is to focus on diet. So we already know how important nutrition is for fetuses, for expecting mothers and young children. So if you're talking about how to promote health and wellness for infants, breast milk is the preferred food for infants during those first 12 months of life, as it can help protect them from diseases. If you have a situation where a parent cannot breastfeed, there actually are breast milk banks where you can purchase breast milk to give to your child. And then having a proper diet across the lifespan really helps lead to health and wellness by promoting a healthy body weight. It helps you function. It helps your brain function well, so you can make great decisions and feel energized and not tired, those kinds of things. And I already mentioned exercise, so it's recommended that you get 30 minutes a day of exercise a day, 5 days a week. Exercise has a lot of physiological and psychological benefits. So obviously it helps keep your body weight in a healthy range, and also helps release stress. It releases hormones that make you feel happier. It can make you feel accomplished. So exercise is really good across the lifespan. So one issue is that children do not get enough exercise. In schools, they don't get enough exercise. So we really should be changing that and allowing children to have more physical activity time during school. But also at home, children need to have a healthy diet and a good exercise routine. Parents can help with that by exercising with them, so taking them outside and playing with them, taking them to the park, and then going back to the free-range parenting discussion, by making your kids stay at home and not go to the park or walk home or those kinds of things, you're limiting their exercise as well. So those are some things to consider. The next one is sexuality. So sex can contribute to wellness throughout the lifespan. That includes in older age. It does become more challenging, but overcoming any kind of obstacles has health benefits for the older population. So they actually reported in your textbook a study that found that for older adults, having sex regularly is associated with a lower risk of death. So again, that's one stereotype that you often hear, is that once you get older, you are just not sexually active anymore, which isn't true, and it can lead to stress reduction and those kinds of things. Okay, so for your assignment for this chapter, I am asking you to come up with a self-care plan for yourself. So I want you to identify some areas of stress for you, and then come up with a plan on how you can deal with that stress. Whether you want to talk about coping mechanisms, or if you want to talk about maybe you can exercise or change your diet, those kinds of things. So you can, it doesn't have to be just things that are in your book, but make sure that it is something that's healthy. So don't say that you're going to sit and binge a new Netflix show all night and ignore all your responsibilities, or that you're going to order a large pizza and eat it all by yourself. So it needs to follow these guidelines that we've been discussing on how to in a healthy way deal with your stress. So I have some other suggestions. So mindfulness and self-care. I had a mindfulness clip, but you can find those online. There's apps to practice mindfulness. And it's just mindfulness is just a state of active, open attention to the present. So it's almost like meditation. So you could look into that if you want to try that. A lot of people do that with yoga. So you could look into doing something like that. And then self-care, I was just going to about how that needs to be healthy. It doesn't have to be something crazy, like you don't have to have a spa day to participate in self-care. It could be something as simple as eating healthy. It could be exercising. It could be going outside and taking a breath of fresh air. It could be just reach out to a friend or a family member and having a quick chat. So it doesn't have to be something like I'm going to sit in a bubble bath with a glass of wine. It can be, as long as it's healthy, but it does not have to be something like that. I also wanted to point out the benefits that pets can have on stress reduction. So pets really reduce stress. They have a lot of physiological, social, and psychological benefits. So you know that there are therapy dogs. There's also therapy cats. So that's what I have pictures of here. So they can go to hospitals, they can go to nursing homes and visit with the patients, and that brings them so much joy. You can measure physiological things and see like a reduction in blood pressure just by interacting with the animal. Especially for children hospitals, that brings them a lot of joy. But also having pets at home can be beneficial for children, especially children who have autism. Because children with autism have trouble connecting socially to other people, and it's easier for them to connect to an animal rather than a person. So that can have a lot of benefits there. It also helps them learn how to take care of something, how to develop empathy, and then helps you as an adult as well with stress reduction. If you have pets, you definitely know that. It can help with depression. So I think I have that slide here. So these are just a couple slides on how pets can help with different things. I already talked about autism, and here's depression. So it helps with feelings of loneliness because you have a companion. It gives you a sense of purpose. So especially with pets and dogs that need a lot of attention, you have to wake up every day and take care of them. They have to be fed, they have to be let out, they have to be walked, they have to be loved on, given attention. So that gives you a definite sense of purpose for your day. It can give you confidence as well. It gets you exercising because you have to walk them. That's on the next slide here. So it can help with obesity. So your dog walking can help you exercise. It also helps with PTSD. It can be very calming. So there's a lot of ways that pets can help as well. So if you want to discuss that and how your pet helps you, then that would be really cool to talk about. But any other ideas you have are also welcome. So I'll let you get on to that now, and you can follow the instructions that I posted in that assignment.